Is anybody there? Let's see. All right, today we're going to make this, and we're going to do it procedurally. So like this is all using modifiers and a bit of animation, and that's about it really. No texturing. This scene only has about 3 objects in it, and it's really all you need to be able to animate something like this quite effectively. So sort of low poly procedural little ocean with islands, and we're going to make the islands rise out of the ocean and animate them as if they're just sort of, you know, generating themselves. And it only requires a couple of controllers. All right, so as I was saying, this is basically all procedural stuff. It's really fun, great for like low poly animation and things like that. And you could probably do the opposite as well. You could probably have the ocean like get sunken down, like as if Moses is walking along the ocean, and split the ocean in 2. That'd be kind of fun to do as well. But yeah, only 3 objects, the tree, well, 2 objects really, the tree and the ocean, and then a few controllers to control displacements and vertex weights. So that's going to be really fun to do. All right, so shall we jump in and give it a go? And thanks again for joining today. Yeah, last week I was a bit busy. I had to mark some papers for my actual job, which is teaching. So there was a shitload of assignments to mark, so I had to get it out of the way. All right. So let's start with a new file. I'm going to stop that for a second. And we're going to set up our basic premise. All right, and you may notice I've actually made a custom startup. So now I have the geo lights and camera all separate into their own collection. It makes it a lot easier to organize things, so I don't need to delete things all the time or hide things, because I'll probably need the camera and the light anyway, so I'm just going to hide that. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask on the chat, because we actually got to talk about quite a few different concepts basically. So we're going to talk about displacements, we're going to talk about vertex weights and how they work, and how they're really useful for things even beyond just rigging. So vertex weights can be used for all kinds of things in Blender, and they're super versatile. So we are going, actually I might keep the cube, actually I'm going to keep the cube for now, just hide that. We can use it as our controller in the future. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to create a basic ocean, and then we're going to attach a vertex weight proximity modifier to that, and then we're going to use the cube as a controller to dictate the weights, and then on top of that we're going to add some particles, and the particles will determine the generation of our trees, and that's going to be really cool to do. So we're going to start with a fresh new plane. And I'm going to scale that up a little bit, just like so. I'm going to apply that scale. And I'm going to, before I subdivide it, I'm going to elongate that first. So let me make sure I have the right selection on. I'm going to just elongate that a little bit, like so. In edit mode, that is. So I'm not affecting the scale here, I'm just affecting the mesh itself. So about that long, and that's fine. And then I'm going, let me turn on screencast as well, just so you guys can see what's going on. If you guys would appreciate that, that's cool. And you can see all that, sweet. All right, so I'm gonna add some edge loops to this, like so. So I'm just adding a bunch of edge loops to get some level of detail there. And I want to have it relatively quadded up. So I want it to have it in a decent square pattern. I don't want it to be like stretched out squares in the mesh. I want it to be fairly even. So then I can, like, if I want to subdivide that even further, I can now subdivide that and I'll get a nice clean gridded sort of structure. All right. All right, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to add a vertex group. Just one vertex group, and we're going to call that displacement. And I'm going to give that an assignment. I'm going to select everything in my edit mode and push assign. So it's going to have a weight of 1 throughout the entire structure. So let's have a look at that with our weight paint. So everything's red, basically. It means there's a value of 1. All right. And now we're going to add a displacement. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to do the vertex weight proximity modifier. So first thing I'm going to do, vertex weight proximity. And what this does, it effectively uses an object that we assign to give a value of our vertex weights, which lets us like sort of generate a procedural vertex weight across the entire thing. So I'll demonstrate that with our cube. So I'm going to bring back our cube now. Put that in there. So our cube will become the controller for our vertex weights. So we're going to call that vertex weight controller. All right. And you can use any object in Blender. You can use a sphere, you can use the monkey, you can even use empties to control this, but I'm going to use the cube just because it's there. And I'm going to put that over here. And then I'm going to choose my vertex group, which is displacement, and then choose the cube as my target object. And now look what happens with the vertex weights in weight paint mode. So if I go into let's see, into our X-ray, this should work. So we're using this as our weight. We're going to make sure it's assigned to the geometry, not the object. And if we go to our weight paint now and put on, let's see if it's working, turn on thing. It's not working today. That should be working. Let's change the vertex weight controller, that's correct. Change it to vertex and make it, let's see, it's not working. It should have worked. Let's try a different object. Let's try a sphere in this case. Vertex group displacement, choose a sphere, and let's have a look at that. Weight paint, there we go. So the sphere is working. I'm not sure why the cube is working, probably because there's not enough geometry. So what the thing is looking for is probably because we don't have any verts in intersecting with the cube. So if I were to subdivide that now, it would work, but it needs vertices to overlap to make that work. So if I did that now with the vertices, let's have a look now. Change that to the cube, and then let's have a go. Vertex weight. You can see according to the vertices it's intersecting. It's working. So that's interesting. And that's because we haven't switched to geometry, and it's looking for vertices that intersect with our thing there. So that's kind of interesting. But we can smooth that out. We can add a subdivision modifier onto that sphere, and now the weights. Oops. Let's just add the sphere back. The weights is creating that sort of island of weight paints. All right. So with that in mind, watch what happens when I move it around. So I can move it around, and it's affecting the weights around that sphere. And this can effectively become a mask to create displacement. So with that in mind, let's invert that weight. So I want it to be a value of 1 or close to 1 with the sphere, where the sphere is, and 0 everywhere else. So I can change that by inverting the fall off. So if I invert that fall off, let's have a look at the weight paint. Now the weight paint is all around, the weight values are all around that sphere, which is really, really cool. We can also do it with other objects as well, obviously, like empties and stuff like that, but let's just stick with the sphere for now. And I might change the fall off type to smooth, just for now. And let's have a look at that. It looks a bit smoother. That's all good. All right. Now, if I want to have 2 islands, I need to create either a second weight proximity, or I can use my sphere and go into edit mode and duplicate that sphere in edit mode. And now I have 2 areas where the sphere is influencing that weight. Now, let's work on the tree. Let's save that first as well. Tree experiment. Let's work on generating some hair particles that we will instance our trees to. So we have to build a tree as well, but we'll get to that in a moment. So just to demonstrate how this is really useful, we're going to add a particle system. And in the particle system settings, we're going to change it to hair. So as you can see here, it's creating hair right across the entire scene here. So 1,000 hairs being created across the entirety of our object. But we can actually change the density of this hair by going to vertex groups and switching it to displacement. And we can also change the length to displacement. So now the hair is only being generated at the point in which our spheres exist. So this is going to be really useful. How cool is that? All right, so let's quickly make a tree, and we're going to have it. We're going to attach the tree to our hairs here. So we're going to make a new tree. So I'm just going to make a basic cylinder, and I'm going to make it like a low poly tree, just like we saw in the preview at the start there. So I'm going to bring down those vertices, make it really simple geometry. Go into edit mode, and I'm going to just make sure it's set to the base here. So I want it to rotate from the base there. And then I'm going to just create a really basic tree structure. So I'm gonna make a new one, change it like that. And you can make it any way you like, obviously. But I'm going to make it really simple. Duplicate that, and it doesn't matter what kind of I'm not really too concerned about the edge flow or anything like that with this, because it's basically a static object that I'm making here. Really simple geometry. And I can duplicate that branch, flip it around, and sort of place it wherever I want. And I might add one more to the top there. All right, so we got our little tree branches, which is really cool. I might fix that up just a little bit, so they don't overlap. So I still want it to look clean. So I'll still like make sure that it's not, a shit model. I'm just going to just clean that up a little bit. All right. Now let's add some spheres just to make the leaves. So I'm just gonna make some spheres. I'm going to just pull them all together, just like that. And we're going to remesh these spheres together to make a low poly sort of bush-like structure for the top of the tree, for the canopies. So I'm just settling that down. I'll add another one there. Cool. And I'll do a few more just around the base of this here. All right. So I'm going to join those together as a single object, like so. And then I'm going to add a remesh modifier to our system here. So let's go to our remesh. So where is remesh? Remesh. Here we are. And you can see it's voxelized it out, but I want to give it a larger value, so it's sort of like low poly in nature. So I'm going to just make it look really blobby and low poly, and I'm going to change the adaptivity up so it creates triangles, basically. Might bring that to 0.1. See, it's creating triangles to make it, you know, adding that triangle sort of structure helps to sort of make it look more sort of low poly like in nature. Cool. I'm going to push apply. And then I'm going to, oops, sorry, opened up the wrong app. I'm going to join these together. And I'm going to move that into my own, a new collection. So I'm going to move that into a new collection called trees. All right. That'll do. Looks good. And now what we can do, we can apply this tree as a object in our particle settings. So in the render settings here, under our particle settings, we change the render as to path, from path to collection. And we choose our trees collection. We'll give it the object rotation, and we will scale up those trees. And notice how they're all pointed downwards. And it's a weird quirk about Blender in terms of its particle generation. So we just have to rotate the tree in the X, well, not the X, in the Y, sorry, in the Y, to have them stick up like so. And we can change the direction any way we like. We could give it a little bit of scale randomness, so they're all different, you know, different sizes. And we can bring down that number to around, you know, 50. Maybe 50 trees. Let's make it about 200 trees. Now, if we were to animate this, these spheres, let's add a quick controller. So I'm going to add a controller for our spheres here. I'm going to give it make a sphere empty. I'm going to bring that over here. I might scale that up in the sphere settings here, just so I have something big and easy to click. Select our spheres, select the empty, Control P, object, keep transform to parent. And now, once we animate this, we're getting a pretty cool effect. How cool is that? So they're actually growing according to the weight paints that we added with that vertex proximity. And we can hide those spheres. We can add that to a new collection as well. We'll hide these controllers. So influence, vertex, weight, influence, objects, obj. And we'll just hide those away. And now we can just have our trees being controlled by that weights. And you can see it here happening in the weight paint. We can see it happening there. It's using that circumference and weights as a means for our object generation. All right. But not only can we use this as we can hide that tree collection as well. So now we only have the trees. So not only do we have the ability to use the vertex proximity to control our trees, we can also use it to control displacement. So before we do that, we're going to unwrap this, UV unwrap it. Just select everything and just push U to UV unwrap. So we have a nice clean unwrap. So if we just open up our UV unwrap here, and look at how it's being generated there, perfectly unwrapped, that's good. We can now add a displacement and use the vertex weights to determine the vertex displacement in the viewport. Good to see everyone. Is everyone enjoying this? I hope everyone's enjoying this video, because it's from now on I'm pretty much going to be doing fun experiments on the live stream, and then like official tutorials on YouTube, because this is a fun way for me to experiment with things. And since I'm making my short film, it's a great way to sort of troubleshoot ideas as I build things out in that film as well. So you know, you never know, a simple experiment like this could end up being useful in an actual production setting. So yeah, hope you're all enjoying it so far. So yeah, thanks for joining. All right, so let's add a displacement. We're going to add a displacement modifier. And you can see it's sort of shifted up, and that's because we haven't assigned any texture to this thing yet. So we need to assign a texture. So we're going to push new, and in the texture tab, this button here, we're going to add some clouds. And we can make that size bigger or smaller, but that will do for now. And in the texture coordinates, we're going to set it to UV. And we want to play with the scale again. So in that texture settings, we're going to change the scale again, try and get something like that. And then we're going to change the strength so it's a little bit stronger. Sorry. All right. And you can see that the displacement is being affected by the entire. It's affecting the entire map here. So what we want to do, you can see here, it also has a vertex group option here for the masking of that displacement. So if we switch it to displacement, which is our vertex group here, that's being affected by our proximity, it's only being affected by that area there. So now if we play that back, let's add some keyframes to this. Let's keyframe the movement here. Keyframe here. Let's go to 125. Keyframe across the trees here. Keyframe that. And then we're going to copy that keyframe at the end there. And pop it here at 250. We have a nice looping animation there now. So you can see that we're getting kind of what we're looking for here, but we haven't really got that island style effect that we wanted. That's because the displacement is still shifted up a little bit, so we need to change the way that the mid-level works, like so. So we're going to change that mid-level and increase that strength. And depending on the way you've organized the stack on this displacement, the trees can be affected as well. So if you wanted to have it sort of, the displacement act on top of the trees, so the trees move up and down too, we can actually shift it like that. And we're getting this weird rolling effect with the trees because the trees are being emitted according to the normals of our stack there. And I think it's a little bit too extreme. So we can actually just we can affect the particle settings as well. So instead of it emitting from the normals, we can change the way that it comes out. So we could actually go to our advanced tab. We can say emit from faces, and we can change the rotation to go just in Y. Well, not Y. Let's see, Z, object Z. So now they're sort of growing out like that, but you know, it's not perfect. So I'm just going to keep it as it was. Velocity hair, and I'm going to keep it down in the particle settings. I'm going to just put that on top. Oh, leave it on the bottom, so on top, so it doesn't really get affected by the displacement. But we're getting a pretty cool effect so far. But notice how we can actually make those islands bigger now by scaling our controller. Because what we're effectively doing, we're scaling those spheres. See how because they're a child of the spheres. The spheres are a child of that controller. We can affect the influence of those weight paints by making those islands bigger or smaller. So now we have a bit bigger island. And we're getting this really cool effect out of this setting here. How neat is that? All right. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm just rolling with this. So we're getting this really cool effect where we're just generating geometry and displacements and trees just with these controllers here. All right. Now I want to add a little bit like of an ocean effect. So I want the ocean to sort of move up and down with this. So we can actually add another displacement, but we're going to have a different displacement settings. So it's a lot more subtle. And then we're going to sort of control it with another object. All right. So let's add another displacement. All right, let's see. Add another displacement. And in this time, we're going to have it controlled by an object, not through the UVs, but first we need to create a new texture and have it controlled by an object. So we'll get to that in a moment. We'll add a new texture to this. So making sure that's a different texture. Actually, we can use the texture that's already there. We're just going to bring down that strength a little bit, like so. All right. And right now, nothing's happening. It's just got a straight up displacement on that. But what I want to do, I want to add the vertex group so it's only affecting the ocean and not the hills. So first, let's add that displacement as a vertex group, but we're going to invert that so it no longer affects our hills here. So it's sort of doing the opposite in this case. And now we're going to add another controller. A sphere in this case, an empty sphere. And this sphere will control the waves, so to speak, of this this setup. So let's have a look at that. We're going to select our displacement in the stack, and we're going to choose that empty. And now if we move our empty around, we're getting a really, move our empty around. We're getting a really simple sort of displacement of water that we can animate over time. So I'm just going to do the same here. I'm going to keyframe this controller and really slightly, I'm going to move it like just a tiny bit there. Keyframe. So notice how we're getting a water effect now. And I want this to loop, so I'm going to loop that with the first keyframe at the end there. So now we're getting some really simple water effect in our displacement there. Looking pretty cool so far. All right. Now, let's just scale up that displacement a little bit. So I want to scale it up. So I'm going to just go to my size settings here, and I want to get a little bit softer in the scale. And notice how the hills aren't being affected here. So I'm going to have it nice and soft there. Might make it a little bit more rough. That'll do. And now the movement needs to be sort of increased, so it's not moving that much. So let's make it a little bit more like so. Location. So we're getting a really nice sort of ocean effect there. And if we want to make this look even more low poly, we can actually add a decimate to this ocean. So we can actually add a decimate and change it to like just a small amount, just something like this to give it that sort of triangular effect on top. So now it looks really low poly. And it's decimating according to the movement. So it's not perfect. So we can actually change the order in which that decimate happens just after the particle settings. And we'll get a much softer displacement there. So it's not being affected by the displacement anymore. It's just sitting above our displacements and our movement there. So we're getting that nice low poly effect that you'd expect from that sort of art style. Ah, no worries. Yes. With the dust, yes, you can add dust particles, yeah, but it can't emit. I tried doing it earlier with like exploding particles. Doesn't work that well. But with dirt and dust, if you wanted to have it sort of grow on the little things, and I'll show you that in a moment, you can do that. And thank you for watching my tutorials. I'm glad that you found it inspiring and a lot of fun to work with. Yeah, and I've got a lot of stuff coming up as well. So if you stick around, I think today I'll be publishing one about animatics. So it's not so much about Blender, but it is about production. And then going forward for the rest of the week, I'll be doing some videos on texturing using Substance and Blender. So that'll be fun as well. And then we'll be jumping straight into rigging. So that's going to be super fun. So yeah, thank you for watching, and thank you for, you know, I'm glad that the tutorials worked out for you as well. All right, so we're getting there. We're getting there with our displacement and setup here. So now I think we're at the stage where we can add some materials to this thing and give it some life. So I'm going to go into our material preview here. And I'm going to start with the ocean, and we're going to do some really clever material tricks with the ocean here to get the hills growing out of the ocean and to get that sort of wavy-like effect. So let's jump into our material settings. So I'm going to select my ocean. I'm going to add a new material. Let's call that ocean. And we're going to procedurally change the color of this material as according to the height data of our geometry here. So if we go to the shader editor and we change this to, we're going to keep the defaults here, and I'm going to add a mapping node like so. And then I'm going to add a separate by XYZ node, and then a ramp. All right. So if we link all of these up according to the right setup, we can get what we want. So we want to switch. First thing we need to add is also a data. Not data. We need to add a what's it called? Input attribute. I think it is. No, not attribute. We need to add a texture coordinate. No, geometry. Geometry. Not geometry. Sorry, my bad. I'm so used to using the node wrangler, I forgot about what it was called. So the texture coordinate node, we're going to hook that in with our geometry. We're going to set it to generated and hook it into our vector, I think it is. Yep, we're going to hook it into our vector. And we're going to then hook this vector into our separate XYZ node. And then we're going to separate by XYZ. We're going to use the Z parameters to split the gradient. And then this color goes into our base color. Now, if we play with our gradient here, we should get something similar to what we would need. So we'll go and if that doesn't work, we can always use the object data as well. There we go, object data, that's better off. And you can see by changing the ramp, we're getting something similar to what we want with just this black and white value. And that's all just done procedurally with a few simple nodes. So what we could do now, we could switch the black value to a blue value to equal water. And the other value to equal the ground. And if we add some things in between, we can clamp that down to get a sharper gradient between the two islands. So now we're getting those island effect. Oops, sorry. And yeah, it's gonna happen. So yeah, I'll probably publish that tonight if I have the time. So we got our island here. Super cool stuff. And now we can actually split this gradient into a few more chunks. So I'm going to add some sand. So make a yellow value to equal some sand. And we can spread that out so we can get that effect. And I'm going to add another one for the water waves hitting the edge of the ocean. So a nice light blue. Can make that a different color as well. And I might add another orange in between just to get that transition looking a little bit more natural. So now we're getting our islands growing out of the ocean just with materials. How cool is that? And you can see the little waves popping up and down because it's sitting just at the right level for the to look like waves. Alright, let's add these. Let's make some trees. Let's make these trees come to life a little bit. So I'm going to go back into my original tree. And because these are all instances of our original tree, they will inherit the material settings from our tree here. So I'm going to add two materials, 1 and 2. I'm going to call this trunk. And the top one I'm going to call it leaves. Alright, so I need to assign the materials accordingly. So let's first just add the colors that we need. So I'm going to make these purple trunks. And I'll make the leaves green, obviously. I might give them a darker color. Like so. And let's just select our trunk. Let's go into isolation selector mode and select our trunk pieces like that. And I'm just going to assign the trunk color like so. And now we have our purple trunks. Let's make it a little bit more saturated. All right, and we can make those tree colors a little bit more saturated too. A bit more cartoony in color. There we go. And we can hide that original tree again. And now it's just about tweaking the render settings so we can actually turn on in the Eevee. We're going to turn on ambient occlusion. We're going to change the distance so it looks a little bit more nicer. We can turn on bloom, turn on screen space refractions and reflections. We can turn on a bunch of other stuff as well if you want to. And I might jump into render view mode, and you can see here it's a bit too dark because we haven't got a HDRI affected. So you can download any old HDRI that you like just from HDRI Haven. I already got one that I can use. So let's go to our render settings, our background settings, turn on environment texture. And then I'm going to link up that texture by clicking open, navigate to where I know that my my HDRI lives. So in this case, it's in one of my old production folders. So I'm going to choose that and just choose a basic sort of HDRI. And I'm going to turn on in the film settings transparency. And I have a pretty nicely lit little scene here now. And we can actually add more and more stuff to this island as well if you wanted to. So what we can do, we can firstly we could change the randomness of these trees. So let's make these trees look a little bit more random. Yeah, it's really simple sort of a tricks they could do to make this thing around. Yeah, I'm just fucking around. This is just a little experiment. This is not for the movie that I'm making. This is just an experiment to show you how simple it is to make like procedural animation that looks sort of low poly and fun, and you can apply it to anything. I did this method for a short film that I worked on for someone else, but it was a lot more complicated sort of execution of this. But the method was basically the same. So what we can do to these trees, let's go to our settings here in the particle settings, and we're going to reduce the number down to 50, but we're going to increase the children number to simple and change the display amount to maybe 10. We'll keep it at 10, but we're going to change the random radius. So we're going to change the radius. Actually, we'll keep it down to 2. Change the radius here so that they separate a little bit. Change the random size up a little bit so it's different sizes, and we're going to crank that back up to maybe 100, 150. So we're getting some random sized children of that stuff. You can also use interpolated, and that's much higher number. Bring that down to 50. Let's make that even smaller. 10. No, 25. Let's go 25, maybe 30. Yeah. We can change the length again, so we can change the scale a little bit more, so it's a little bit higher. And we can add some randomness to this now. So if we go to our roughness tab in our particle settings, we can change the endpoint so it's a little bit more rough and a little more random. We could change the randomized nature of it so they can be a little bit more rotated. We can change the size so they kind of wiggle it a little bit. And we can change a bunch of different settings here. We can even change the parting so it looks a bit different. Let's see. Does it work? No. So it's a little bit about experimentation as well. We could change the clump. So they clump together or separate to one another. And you can do all kinds of stuff like that. So let's add some more random nature to that. And they're really rotated now. We can actually reduce that endpoint rotation a little bit. And just change that random rotation a little bit more as well. Just want a little bit. But now that looks a bit more cartoony, a bit more randomized. And of course, it's not working now because of the interpolation. So if I switch it back to simple, that should follow through. So yeah, it's working better there. So depending on what your setup is, it can and can't work. So sometimes you might need to turn on interpolated. I think there's an option to turn affected by modifiers as well, but I'm not sure where that sits. Let's see. Emission, velocity. There's a little button here somewhere for being affected by modifiers, but I can't find it. But that's okay. So just stick it to simple, and I might just increase the number there. So it looks a bit more random. And there we go, something like that. That looks fun. So we're getting that island, and we can make the island more and more, we can make it stronger or weaker as well. We can make it displace even higher if you want to. So you can increase that strength so it's even higher or softer. But because the particle settings for the trees are sitting below, on top of the displacement, it's not going to be affected by that displacement. All right. So if we want to now, we can actually add extra objects to this thing as well. So because we're using a collection for our particle instance, we can actually add other objects to this collection to give it more objects to play with. So if we add a rock, let's add a random rock. So let's add let's just make a round cube. Increase that radius a little bit, and I might add a subdivision surface, and I'm going to add just a random displacement to this thing to make this little rock work. That is, so displace. Where are we? Displacement, new. Let's just make a new one. Let's set it to UV as well. Displace, new. Whoops, wrong one. Make a random clouds. And I'm just making a really basic rock here. And this is where using procedural modeling can really help save time. Because now I can just I'm just going to use soft select to create this little rock. Random little peaks and valleys. There's our rock there. It looks a bit chunky. So let's just change the size there to look a bit more rock-like. I'm going to give it a color. Let's give it a brown color. Like that. And then I'm going to add a decimate on top of that to give us that low poly effect for a rock. Let's add a decimate. Let's see, where's decimate? Decimate, decimate, decimate. There it is. We're going to increase our factor here. And we've got ourselves a nice little low poly rock there. Let's go with that. Push apply, apply, apply. And now we can actually move this to our trees collection, and look what happens. We now have our rocks a part of that collection now. So now we have rocks that also are affected by our particles there. And we can move our location of our rocks up and down a little bit. Let's see. Just so they sit upon our little system there. And if we go to our particle settings and switch on pick random, it'll randomly pick the rock or the trees for that selection, but I think it looks good as it is. And we can add more rocks as well, change it. So if we duplicate that selection and we could change the size of that rock, apply the scale. We can even give this a new material as well, so we can copy that material, give it another color. So a different assortment of rocks as well. And you can see them all popping up there as well. As it gets generated. So that's super cool. And yeah, now if you wanted to make that turn into a scene, we can actually hide that trees. We can reposition our camera so we have something like this maybe. So that's what we're going to see in the camera. And if we go to our camera settings, just so we know exactly what's going on. Viewport display. Passapartout. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how to say that word, but basically the black bars. Film gate, if you want to call it anything. We can now just see exactly what's going on. And we're getting that sort of cool effect there. And now we can add a little bit of a sky. So instead of using that HDRI as our sky, we'll add a sky. Oops, rotate that way. We can add a sky. And I'm going to procedurally add like a gradient to this thing, just like we did with the hills. Scale that, make sure that's turned on, applied. We're going to add a emission. So right now it's white. We can make it blue. So if you want to have it flat color, we can have it just a flat color like that. Or we can add a little bit of a gradient in the shader editor. So just as we did before, we're going to add a separate by XYZ. Add a ramp. Hook into the Z like that. Like this. Hook it all up. And we're going to change it to object again. So if we look here, right now it's not being applied because we have all these rotations set up. So we have to apply our rotation, So now it knows that, you know, this is set, so Z is up, for instance. And now if we play with our settings here, we can affect the scale, so, and also change the location as well. And this time it's a bit too sharp with objects, so we can switch it to generated. Hopefully that works better, and it does. So instead of having this as black, we can have it as white or a light blue. And we can have, as the sky goes higher in the sky, we can have it like a darker blue. And we can clamp down that as well, just to get it looking a little bit more obvious. And now we have our islands rising out of the ocean, like so. And the cool thing is, if you wanted to, you can keep adding objects to this thing. So it's procedural, right? So we can, in our vertex weights here, we can actually add another sphere if we wanted to into this object. So we can actually add another object. So duplicate this, and you can see by duplicating, we're actually adding extra islands. So that's really cool too. And we can, you know, affect the scale of that island, make it smaller. And it's completely procedural, so that means that you can generate new stuff anytime you want, and it won't break. How cool is that? So in about an hour, we created some trees, we created an ocean, we created some islands and a sky, and we got this really cool effect going on throughout the entire animation. And if we wanted to, we can add some low poly, we can even add some low poly clouds if you wanted to as well. Yep, so you can work this on any 3D shape instead of a plane. You can actually do it on, anything. So if we want to do it on a planet, oh, this would be fun. Let's do it on a planet before we wrap up. Let's make a little sphere that, you know, is like a low poly world, and we'll have islands generate across the setup here. All right, let's have a go. Let's try and apply this setup to a spherical object. All right, let's see. We'll continue. We'll keep all our layers there. We're going to make a separate one this time. We'll just make a separate sphere. We're going to go with a round cube again. So we're going to go with a big planet. All right, a big planet like so. Let's subdivide that planet. So I've got a few subdivisions in there. Let's just go into our regular mode there. And this time we're going to add another vertex group. So same method as before. Let's call it islands again. In this case, islands. Go into our vertex settings, and we're going to give it a weight of 1, a sign. Let's add the same method. So we're going to add another circle. Oh, sorry. Let's add, in this case, let's add an empty to control the displacement. So we're going to add a round cube. No, not a round cube. An empty. So that you can actually use empties to control the displacement as well. So add an empty. All right. And then we're going to add a particle instancer. So add a particle system. Make it a hair. We're going to add the density to equal the islands and the length to equal the islands. And now this vertex proximity will add to the sphere. Let's add a vertex proximity, like so. We're going to set it to our islands. We'll set it to our, this time, instead of using geometry, we're going to use object. So the object is going to be this empty. And we're going to invert that. So that should work. Let's see. No, it's not working. Well, let's try in this case then. Oh, wait. Vertex proximity. That should be working. Yeah. Let's just go with an object then instead. Let's go with circle, sphere. Let's just go with an icosphere in this case. Let's bring that here. Like so. Let's add another subdivision to this as well. And we'll set it to geometry, object islands. So now that's working with that. Cool. So that's working out pretty good. Let's set it to soft again. Smooth that out. All right, let's make sure that's working out like so. Let's add a displacement. Let's see. Add that displacement like so. New. We'll set that to UV. We need to unwrap this thing first though. So let's go to our UV editor and unwrap that quickly. Need to add some seams in this case. 1, 2, 3, 4. This should be enough. Add some seams. Mark seam. Unwrap. Fuck it, that'll do. Doesn't need to be fancy for this one. So we'll add a displacement texture. Clouds. Increase the size like so. And we're going to have it affected by our islands. Increase the mid level like so. Decrease that strength maybe, I don't know. So now we got the islands working. How cool is that? It's really sweet. So yeah. So we're having that work like so. And you just have to experiment with different objects. So now we can actually add in that particle instance this like exact same particle instances as this. So we can just go to our particle settings, into our render as collections, and we're going to go to trees, increase the scale, object rotation. So now we have trees growing out of there. Boom. How cool is that? And we can actually use the same material. We could try and use the same material as our ocean here, and we might have to do some adjustments, but let's go into our ocean. Let's select this material. We're going to go to our material settings, go to ocean, and this little button here, you can actually drag and drop it like so. But in this case, we're going to duplicate that material because we're going to do some adjustments here. Instead of using the X, Y, Z, we're going to adjust it by pointedness. We'll try and do that. So compositor, shader editor, and instead of using separate X, Y, Z, we can use, let's see, geometry. Let's see if I'm not sure if pointedness works with Eevee. So in that case, let's just try ambient occlusion. Color. And in this case, we can have to adjust the, yeah, it kind of works. Because it's screen space, so we have to play with the different settings here. Let's try another one. Geometry. Let's open that up again. Geometry tab. Let's just try normal. That could work. No. Tangent. Parametric. Position. It really just depends on how it works. We can try and see what happens again with the pointedness, and then let's try and see where we get. Doesn't quite work, but there is a way of doing it. I just got to figure out how to do it with the material settings. Let's see if we can do it according to vertex data. Vertex color. Vertex color could work if we could find a way of animating that vertex color. But for now, let's just go back to our original settings here. Let's keep it like that. And we can actually add a wiggle to this to make that work. But to get the islands to grow and animate like that, I think it's just a matter of finding out what the proper way to do that would be. Let's see. There's got to be another input here that could work. Object info. We could probably do it according to another object. So according to the proximity of the object. Object info. No, not object info. Let's see. Input. I'm not sure, but we can figure it out. Maybe I can figure it out next week. But basically, yeah, that's it. That's the same sort of method though. And we get that sort of effect, which is really cool. I've got to find out what this, what the right thing setup is is. But yeah, I'll make sure to add that to. Maybe if I make this a source file, I'll add that to it once I figure out the how we can make that work. But we can actually add now. If you wanted to, you can actually add several objects to this thing. And if you had like an armature set up, you can actually have this randomly generate influences according to like the movement of the joints. And you can see here, just because it's all procedural, we can add as many islands as we want to, which is super cool. And you can add double up, so if you want some trees not to be on islands, you have to just make another displacement, but this time without the trees being affected as well. And if we want to add that water effect, we just have to, in this case, I think I might just copy the actual attribute, so I can actually copy the modifier. Hey guys, just giving a breakdown on how to solve that that shader issue there with the planet. So here's the final result. Obviously without the spheres there to get in the way, but you can see there that the shader is working. So we're getting that nice transition from the water to the grass. So let's check out how I've solved this issue. Okay. The first thing you may have noticed is that I have added a modifier to both the planet and the spheres. And they are both dynamic paint modifiers. So a dynamic paint modifier is actually something that it sort of transfers vertex color values to a mesh based on another mesh when they intersect. So you assign in this with the little balls that are creating that displacement. You assign a dynamic paint modifier to the balls and give it a brush attribute. You say that the source is a mesh volume plus proximity, and I set the fall off to smooth. That's all I've done with that one. Whereas on this one, with the modifier, same modifier, dynamic paint, I've added it as a canvas. So it's receiving, inverted commas, the paint from the planet here, from the little balls, and I've set it up so it's a dry addition, and that it only lasts about 10 frames. The color only lasts 10 frames after being in contact with the ball. The second thing we have to do is give assign a vertex color to our ball here in our vertex color attributes here. So by default, the vertex color is named DP wet map, and when you add the modifier, it doesn't automatically add the name. So you have to actually copy that name and then add it to your vertex colors here in the vertex color attribute in your object data properties. And once you've done that, you can actually add the attribute as an input in your node editor in the material setup, and then you just have to hook that up to your color ramp, and then hook the color ramp into the principal shader, and then just adjust the gradient according to the kind of graduation you want. And after you've done that, you basically get this as a result, which is super cool. So if you want to do fancy planets with different islands, and you can have like castles and trees and clouds come out of that, you can easily do that now. The only thing it doesn't do is that it doesn't do the little bits of waves in the material there based on the displacement. But you know, you're not really missing much there, and you get a really cool result anyway. So yeah, that's how to solve that issue. I wasn't going to go into it step by step because I have to reconstruct it all. So, but there's a breakdown, and I'm going to supply this file on Gumroad for free, so you can test it out yourself. Have a look at how it's built and pull it apart, break it, and play with it as you will. And I'm also going to include the original plane that we made in this live stream as well. So you can have a look at both and how they're constructed, because the material setup for the ocean there is a little bit different. All right, that's it really. That's how you solve the issue. Yeah, hopefully that was clear enough. But yeah, until next Monday, I will say catches and have fun.